Welcome to the Latin Playground, where we delve into the nature of language, the nuances of Neo-Latin, and the spiritual experiences of the scientist and mystic Emanuel Swedenborg. Never heard of Neo-Latin or Swedenborg? No problem. Come learn alongside us as we explore the inextricable link between spiritual revelation and grammar.
Let's look at our passage.
Very good.
I'm very excited to get into this. I had this idea before our talk that, they do this. People who have money and equipment have studied what your eyes do when you look at, or different people who are on the autistic spectrum, or, what are they looking at in an image compared to other people, what they look at. I'd love for you to, it would be so interesting to show you what my eyes do when I look at a Latin sentence, because it's different than an English sentence. I skim down to the end often to try to see, okay, where's the other half of that, and then kind of come back. So if I'm
that'd be fascinating.
Go down to the end, come back, and then to see how and I'm always interested. Often when I'm crunching something, I like to put parentheses around the pieces. Some of those things are there together. What are the pieces, and then try to figure out what the pieces are doing. So the very first bit here is ut haec scirem. I would put parentheses around that. I want to talk a tiny bit about the funky S, but if you've looked at the first editions, you're probably familiar with the funky S. It's very interesting that in ancient Greek, they did this too, where the final sigma is written differently than the sigma anywhere else. If it starts a word or in the middle of a word, you do it different. And the same with this Latin S. Every word that ends in S, S is perfectly normal, but the other S look like Fs. There's only one F in this entire passage. It's in the fourth to last word, which is flamma. And if you look carefully there, you can see there's just a crossbar on the F, but in every other respect, the F's and the S's look exactly alike, which just takes some adjustment for people when they're getting used to the first editions. And you'll also see a couple of ligatures. So in that second word, that's hike, that's AE. So the AE is a ligature together. And then you also have several AEs in you, and you also have OEs in here, like coily. In the third line, third right-hand side, coily is COELI. That's a ligature. So ut haec scirem. It's quite typical for Swedenborg to start with a subordinate clause. So you haven't gotten to the main verb yet. So that I might know these things.
Nice.
And Ray, you were talking about moods, I think, about different moods. And it is really interesting how you have different moods in language. And this is starting with a subjunctive mood in scirem, so that I might know these things. And I was interested in this ampersand, beautiful italic ampersand there, et procerto. He wouldn't have to say that. He says, so that I might know these things. Procerto is simply forced, just like our expression. But why the and? So that I might know these things, and parentheses, know them, close parentheses, for certain. Not only kind of know them, but really be convinced about it. And then let's throw in another phrase before we get to the verb. Ex divina domini misericordia. 3 capitals in a row. Swedenborg uses the capitalization of emphasis rather than reverence. But you do have some reverence words in here, divina. And divina is at the party with misericordia. They have the same ablative singular ending. Domini is sandwiched in the middle. So the Lord's, the possessive, is sandwiched between, from the divine mercy of the Lord, or from the Lord's divine mercy. But we don't know what that, from the Lord's divine mercy, what is it doing in the sentence? An adverbial phrase. It could attach to a number of different things in the sentence. And we don't know yet. Here we get to the main verb, datum est. It was given. A huge thing about the Latin galaxy. The Latin galaxy loves the past. English loves the active. It seems avoidant. It was granted by whom? You know, sounds avoidant. Latin has a perfect passive participle and no perfect active participle. It's defective. It's lacking a participle. So it's easier to do that in Latin, and it makes kind of clunky English. But so that I might know these things, and for certain, by the divine mercy of the Lord, it has been given. Datum est could mean either it was given or it has been given. Nunc, now, per plures annos, for many years. Again, he's building up the tension. This kind of thing drives my wife crazy. It's like, what's the punchline of the story? Like, just tell me, I'm winding up and I'm going down the garden path. What are you talking about? It says, it has been granted, doesn't say to whom, but it was so that he would know. So it's probably to him. Now, for many years, we would say for many years now. And pair is interesting because it's through with the accusative. So it's got kind of an action, like it was kind of throughout, like, yeah, for many, not just sort of intermittently, but for many years. And in case that didn't come across, he says then, haine continue, almost continually. Pine, almost continually. So let's get to the punchline here. He still hasn't gotten to the other part of the verb. Cum spiritibus et angelis, with spirits and angels, loqui, to speak. The blinking light goes off on your dash. It has been granted. He doesn't say to whom. He could have had a dative of mihi. It's been granted to me, but he doesn't even say that. It's quite a passive way of saying, I'm the lucker. He didn't say that. He just said, it's been granted now for many years to speak almost continually with spirits and angels. I wonder whether this is in 1751. He says in various different ways. The short story is this started in 1745. He's at it about 6 years now. He says early on, there's one point at which he's 9.5 months in. He said it started in mid-April of 1745. He's 9.5 months into the end of January or early February. And he says this has been going on for 8 months now because I had a month off when I was traveling. That's what he means by the paine continue. Almost, just like full disclosure, when he was traveling back to Stockholm at one point, it shut off for a month, which is really interesting, and then kicked back in. And he talks about that in some other passages. Now, okay, so that's your meat of it. Astonishing statement. I've been allowed for many years now, just about continually, to talk with spirits and angels. And now we don't know what the beginning means, so that I might know these things.
That's what I was going to say, right? Connecting it back to the beginning.
Just been saying,
yeah.
These things is what we had before. Now, this is the part that interested me so much about this passage. Ampersand, and with spirits or angels. So he just said with spirits and angels. Now he says, and with spirits or angels. I'll tell you what I think that means in a minute. Of the first heaven. You probably know this idea. There are 3 heavens. The Bible talks about the third heaven. So the first is actually the lowest one. With spirits or angels of the first heaven. This is a phrase that fascinates me. Ipsa met illorum loquella. Now, that ipsa met, it has an MET on the end. You take that off, that's ipsa and loquella. So ipsa is at the party with loquella. And illorum is sandwiched again. That genitive is in between the two. But they could be one of 2 things, right? It could be nominative, which would be performing the role of a subject, or you brought up the idea of apposition, could be an apposition to the subject, apposition would be shown to be playing the same role as the subject by the fact that they're both in the nominative. Now, in classical Latin, if this were ablative singular, which is an oblique case, I always think for some reason about baseball. You have a pitcher and a catcher. Those are the direct, like you have a subject, verb, object. Those are the sort of direct cases. The oblique cases are they're outfielders, like the ablative's way out there. If that's ablative, though, in classical Latin, you would almost always need to have a preposition if it's going to be ablative. Is it in? Is it by? Is it what? What is it? But I happen to know because we already have the subject implied in the datum est that it's not the subject. This is in the ablative, but Neo-Latin allows the ablative. Swedenborg certainly uses the ablative by itself with no preposition. And so I've been able to speak with spirits and angels, and with spirits or angels of the first heaven in ipsa met illorum loquella, in their own language. And he could have said just their language, illorum loquella would have been plenty. But he adds one of those thisy things, an ipsa, which is an intensifier.
Oh.
And then it's an intensifier with an intensifier on the end, which is met. Ipsa met cranks it up a little more. I had these conversations with spirits or angels of the first language in their freaking language.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. Scott, freaking language.
This is emphatic. This is ipsa met illorum loquella, and that ipsa met sort of coming first. It's like, can you believe it?
Yeah.
Not my language, their language. Semicolon. Etiam quandoque, also sometimes cum angelis secundi corli, with angels of the second heaven, comma illorum. Latin is wonderful if you said the woman swallowed the spider the fly, Latin's very good at skipping things and assuming that you'll know what's going on because it's so clear with the inflection. You sort of know who's who. In English, it would get confusing if you said, I saw 3 sheep, tasted some food, and then went into a whole riff about, I don't know, you just had a whole pile of nouns because you're implying that the verb is there. Well, illorum implies ipsa met loquella. So I spoke with spirits or angels of the first heaven in their language, believe it or not, their very language. Also, sometimes with angels of the second heaven in theirs.
Yeah.
Illorum, and it's kind of striking to see an illorum just like a floating genitive just hanging out in midair there, and then he's got a but, semicolon, said, loquella. Now, this is very interesting because he set up a certain expectation. Swedenborg's very structural. He's very orderly. Very, very orderly. He pays a lot of attention to these kind of patterns. It's a very pattern kind of language that he's got. He breaks the pattern here. The whole idea here was with spirits or angels of the first heaven in their language at the end, right? With angels of the second heaven in theirs. But, now we get the language first. Now we get the language comes first. Then the angels, then the third heaven, right?
Yeah.
We're getting it in a reverse order here. But the language of the angels of the third heaven only, modo. It's always interesting in English to figure out where to put your onlys.
Yeah.
Apparuit, appeared to me. We got a new finite verb. So it turns out that said introduced actually a whole new sentence in effect. It's all related to what's going on, but we've got a new main verb and we've got a new subject. Those loquellas before were in the ablative. I spoke to them in their language. But here, now the language is the subject, the loquela of the angels of the third heaven appeared, mihi, to me. Now he's in the dative,
Nice.
so you get him in there. Appeared to me only sicut as a radiatio lucus. Not even language.
Rays of light.
Lisa translates it as a burst of light.
Burst.
Ooh, you know? And I'm very interested in the implications of saying that it appeared to me. Like, he's not saying that's what you would experience. Maybe you're a better person. You would understand it more or something like that. I'm just saying, to me, it appeared like a radiating of light. Often there's a great word, that radiatio. It has a TIO on the end.
Mm.
In English, they make very boring, sort of technical, abstract sounding nouns. A radiation. There was a radiation. But in Latin, that's a very verby noun. And you can often put an ing on it and do perfectly well. It came as a radiating, a burst of light, a whoa of light.
Yeah.
In which, in qua, perceptio, no verb, thank you, in which perception, presumably the verb to be, in which there was perception. I'm a little lost now because I don't know what it's like to have language come at you as a radiating of light in which there is perception. Whose perception? My perception? Their perception? I don't know who's even perception is sort of a human word. Who's perceiving what? But in which there was, understood, a perception from the flame of goodness which was in it, in Erot.
Right. Oh man, it's so cool. I just want to jump in to say that, like, the perception, he's talking about language, but he's saying it didn't happen like language. It was just this radiating light that seems like it generated perception or something. He's like, well, and I guess that's language, or like I couldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the meaning, like almost perceptio might be meaning or something.
Yes. Right. What you're actually getting an awareness of something, like there's a thought and you can see this light. It'd be cool. Near-death experience, people talk about stuff like this, like here's this wave of light, and when it hits you, all of a sudden you're thinking things.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, weird. I guess that perception was in the light, and he blames the flaminess, because you can tell, because that Y is feminine, ex flama, from the flame of goodness, but it's not from the goodness that was in it. It's from the flame of goodness, but it's the flame that was in it. So there was a flame in the light, happened to be a flame of goodness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is how I experience language. So one of the things that I love about this passage, and let me know if you need me to shut off my camera again, happy to do that. Well, doesn't this passage speak to a multi-layeredness? Isn't it interesting to talk about a language in the first heaven and seemingly a different language that Swedenborg used when he was in the second heaven, and the third heaven, he has to just shut down the sentence order and start over again, because I got to tell you, the loquela of that, it wasn't even loquela-ish. It was just like okay. It reminded me of another passage where Swedenborg gets handed something from an angel of the highest heaven, and he looks at it and he can't understand a thing that's written on the paper, and he just hands it back to the person, and the person said, well, the gist is, But so Swedenborg's pretty humble. Like, he could have been arrogant about, yes, I have this great insight, I've been in heaven. He's saying, I don't know, I'm only 6 years in, I wasn't ready for that communication. It was just like, like a good nuclear explosion that had perception in it.
Flaming goodness.
There was a flame of goodness in there. So it gave me this warm feeling, and there was an awareness of something from that goodness that was in it. Hard to put into words. And Swedenborg often does say, I mean, I think that's cool. And it's cool how the structure of the sentence flips around when you get to that third one. It's like he just, yeah, I can speak normally about what happened in that first heaven. I can even kind of sometimes, I was up there in that second heaven, third heaven was, I don't know, what can I say?
What is X? EX? What does that mean?
What's
Out of,
that?
from.
From. Oh, yes. Okay.
From or out of, that's right.
Or just of sometimes.
Okay.
There's only about 16 prepositions, so they all mean just about everything. They're your best friends when you're first learning a language because they're the most recognizable words. And when you've been at it for 40 years, they're really problematic because they mean a lot of different things. And a lot of discussions go on in the NCE about what is that X and what is that doing?
Yeah.
Like that first X at the beginning was interesting, that it was kind of out of that divine mercy of the Lord that this has happened. But towards the end, it's that a perception from probably, how it is when you have that flame of goodness, how it's got that perception in there, like that.
So is he saying that the spirits speak to him in their language and he understands it?
Yes.
Somehow.
And he says, yes, that's right. And he says in other passages that there is a universal language of thought and nobody needs to be taught it. Heaven and Hell 243 is one passage I happened to write down today. You could look at that talks about how it's just instinctive with all of us. We all know it. It's the language of thought. And the one thing I want to end on right here is, as we wind down, is that there's a whole translation philosophy, which is that you don't go, and this is not from Swedenborg or whatever. Eugene Nida had this whole theory about going up into meta language. We're talking about meta before, go up to metadata, you go up to meta language, go across and come down. An example from French would be that a French person might say, j'ai mal à la gorge. I have bad at the throat. If you stick that straight into English, I have bad at the throat. No English person ever said, I have bad at the throat. Going straight from English to French to English creates terrible, terrible English. But if you go into meta language, which is that my throat hurts, and then you come down to, I have a sore throat. My throat is sore. French wouldn't say my, they would say the. They would say the throat, even though it's your throat. But we would say my throat, or I have a sore throat. And that's going up into this meta language. And so Swedenborg's going up, he's going up multiple levels, and then trying to bring that down into Neo-Latin, and trying to.
That's what I'm really interested in, is that because Swedenborg does say that the spiritual world has a universal language and we all just are born knowing it. It's like just intuitively what your inner perception kind of is, it seems like, or something. And yet here he's saying, well, different language on the different levels, and yet he's still able to understand it all. So there's something, that's an interesting play of the same but different, if there's something universal, but actually it's different.
Yeah.
Of course, he describes how those levels, what distinguishes them is their openness to love and wisdom itself, so the deeper you go, the more sort of brilliant the love and the wisdom is. And so you have to be open to that, to be on that,
right,
like to perceive on that level, I guess. So
he says the angels at the lower level don't even hear what the angels at the higher level are talking about, like it's completely beyond them. So he, in that chapter in Heaven and Hell on language, which I highly recommend to you, he emphasizes for much of that chapter, if memory serves, that there's one language, it's a universal language. Everybody knows it. There's no language barrier up there. There's no Tower of Babel or whatever. Everybody understands everybody. And then at the end of the chapter, he says, yeah, well, there's a bunch of different languages. There's thunder language. There's language of, body movements. There's, and he rhymes off a bunch of other, hey, but
Right.
all the same language. And I went, thunder language. Wait. Tell me more about thunder language. What are you talking about there?
That's
Well,
And-
and I just want to point out too that in the Western esoteric tradition, I believe, generally speaking, language words are a flame. Like the voice is, like I'm interested in. If I could read Latin, I could read some of these alchemical texts.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
that piece.
Yeah,
wow.
absolutely.
I didn't know that about that flame, so that's cool.
That is cool.
Interesting
And
connection.
thinking about creation at language, like speaking things into existence and
Mm-hmm.
of language, and the idea of spells, that you could say certain words in a certain order and stuff
Yep.
happens.
Yep.
One of our
Yeah.
household quotes that we bring up is from Alan Moore, an interview he's a graphic novel guy. And he talks about once upon a time, to spell was to cast a spell.
Ah,
Hmm.
right.
Yes, right.
That's right. Spelling. That's right.
Right. And I think that's that whole language, right? What language, what words you're using are the concepts that you're living by. So it creates
Mm-hmm.
that restriction of, okay, what is your future? What is your context going to be?
And I think what rescues the whole project, so like you certainly could think, okay, there's some divine being, there's stuff radiating down layers of light above the highest heavens, and then you've got the heavens that are receiving it in various different ways, and then it goes down through the world of spirits, then it gets mediated into our higher levels of our minds, and comes down to our lower level minds, and comes down to this earthly language, and it's sort of like, oh my gosh, it's so far down the pike. It's the worst. I have a couple of grandchildren who love playing Whisper Down the Lane, and it's just even with only like 5 or 6 people, especially if 2 of them are under the age of 5. You will get a very different sentence just coming at a small table. So how could we possibly not be distorting this language? But Swedenborg suggests that there is also a direct, so he talks a lot about inflow, and that there's indirect inflow that goes through the heavens, but there's a direct inflow from the divine as well. And I think of the direct inflow as being kind of a correction, because then when you read it, but then, something happens in your head.
Mhm.
And that thing is back up into the realm of where this stuff came from. Is different for different people, is different with your different experiences and so on.
Right.
But there's some, it's not the only thing is the whisper down the lane. There's another
Yes.
back channel.
Mm-hmm.
We have that receptor in us that sort of knows how to sort of almost magnetically wants to pull us back to that flame of goodness or whatever, get back to the light
And turns these crazy squiggles on the page into meaning, and then starts to feel, that sentence is kind of emotional to me. Because he's talking about, this has been going on for a while. It's total mercy. It's amazing. And he got something out of each language, but he can't even use the same kind of description for that highest one. And I just read another passage the other day in what I'm editing right now that talked about communication from that highest level, that he said it was like a wave. It sounded like a resonance, like that they put out. It's not articulated words. It's that they feel something in their will, and then that vibrates your will, and there's a small thought component to it, but the main thing is that your heart is feeling things.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, that's what I want to mention this too, because I was connecting back to language is about feeling. We think of language as such a cognitive thing, but you were talking about that center of the galaxy. It's like you feel it viscerally. And so language is this squiggly lines on a page or sounds being modulated through my mouth, but it creates a feeling inside. And that feels like that heart resonance, which is maybe the flame and the goodness and everything. But just that, I think that's so.
Even self-talk, like how we think, how we talk, not even like vocalizing, but how you talk to yourself, how your thoughts and your self-talk. Yeah.
It's your
That's right.
feelings. How's that making you feel?
It's a big deal. Yeah.
That's amazing.
But also that Greek word nous is familiar to me, and that in terms of the direct knowing, the noetic faculty of like skipping all the intermediary steps and the direct connection.
You sort of have to go through it, but then it's like learning the piano or anything else. You go through scales and this note is this note. It's all very cerebral and kind of detached to begin with. But then after a while, you hardly even think about that because it's just you're feeling things and
you're feeling things. That's so cool.
And so a lot of it is about Swedenborg. And Swedenborg started learning this Latin language when he was around the age of 11, possibly even younger. So it goes pretty deep for him. Like this is a pretty deep, a lot of things happened to him. A lot of conversations with people happened in this language. I think it was a really living language to him. And
that's so cool.
But he's trying to build thoughts to get you back to a place of feeling, and he has to just take these building blocks of prepositions and participles and try to get something going. And so it's fun. What I hope to do in whatever we do with this, to bring a passage that's language related, I think is fun.
Yeah.
Swedenborg says a lot about language, and so we're looking at language, but we're also looking at language. And
yeah, and I think what I would do in this podcast would be to like end it with a like reflective, even music backed reading of this passage in the NCE translation, just for somebody to just like take it in.
Oh, nice.
And see what feeling arises. What feeling does this language create in you? And
after the dissection.
Yes, I like that.
That's right.
What kind of.
And that's a great idea. I like that. And music is so amazing for putting a feeling in there, or just allowing a certain emotionality to happen and everything. Arcana Cœlestia 3346. Ut haec scirem et procerto ex divina Domini misericordia datum est nunc per plures annos aene continue cum spiritibus et angelis loqui et cum spiritibus seu angelis primi coeli ipsamet illorum loquela etiam quandoque cum angelis secundi coeli illorum sed loquela angelorum tertii coeli modo apparuit mihi sicut radiatio lucis in qua perceptio ex flamma boni quae inerat.
In order for me to learn all this and know it for certain, the Lord, in His divine mercy, has allowed me to talk with spirits and angels almost continually for many years now. With spirits and angels of the first heaven, I have been granted to use their own language. And sometimes with angels of the second heaven, I have been granted to use theirs. The speech of angels in the third heaven, though, only presented itself to me as a burst of light in which perception radiated from a blaze of goodness at its core.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you so much. It just makes me smile all the time, and it's been a while now since I've had my head in the Latin of anything. So it's fun to get back in it and remember things like prepositions, which are the slipperiest little things in the world. I didn't know. I was glad you said at the beginning of when you're learning a language, they're your best friends, but after that, you don't trust them as far as you can
trust them. Funny.
I just didn't know that by and with and in, they're all the same thing. I mean,
whatever.
Yeah.
I already used the other one, so I'll use this one this time. Whatever.
But anyway, that passage was really, really cool. Thanks for choosing that one about the mind-blowingness of the third heaven. I mean, he was already mind-blown with the Ipsamet.
Ipsamet, right. I was like, God.
Right.
But then we got increasing mind. So thank you, Jonathan. So fun.
Oh, so fun.
Yay, thank you. More, please. Also, I love the idea of helping people to kind of even get just like a small little toehold on Latin, because, you know, in any ancient language, I just feel like it's so valuable to, you know, just trust in people's curiosity and ability to just get at least oriented, so that if they see Latin, they recognize, oh, that's Latin, at least, you know, even just that.
Now, I had not had the thought, but when Chelsea brought this up, I thought, well, it's not like that niche is just overcrowded. The Neo-Latin spirituality podcast zone is just
Really
so
top of the charts.
overtaken
Top of the
from-
charts for the Neo-Latin spirituality.
We're going to be the
podcast.
influencers of the Neo-Latin.
Exactly.
That's right. Finally,
What
we found
was that?
We're going to be the influencers
The
for
influencers.
Neo-Latin. Yeah.
in that space. That's right. That's right.
Well, I really learned a lot about Swedenborg, you know, just the way, just your emphasis on explaining the third, heaven, the third realm, just how that shifted and how it was written really brought a lot of that home to me. And just hearing, you know, he heard the angels speak in their language, but he understood that. Those are things that I didn't come here having an understanding of, or just really, it was really impactful for me to read it this way, and then also have it be like, oh, okay. So it really was a good introduction to some of Swedenborg's writing, and then also the Latin pieces as well. So really tied everything in together really well.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes me super happy.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's really great. It's really great.
Yeah, I love this, and it's giving me lots of ideas. And I wanted to say that, like, your book, Felicia, is Winne Ile Poo, right? And like, so instead of it being Winnie Iste Poo, right, would have a different energy to it. So it's like that poo.
Oh, poo. Yes, right.
Very good.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be with you all, and I love your passion, and it's so fascinating, enriching for me to hear what you're interested in, what you're working on, you know, all that. So I'm so glad that this really felt like an exchange, which is what I was hoping for, you know, and a multifaceted transmission back and forth, you know, kind of thing. So that's rewarding for me.
All right. Thank you,
Great.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
That's a wrap on the fun of the Latin Playground for now, a production of the Swedenborg Foundation. As a nonprofit, the Swedenborg Foundation depends on the generous giving of donors who find value in the spiritual ideas we've explored here today. Without Latin translation, we wouldn't be able to share what Swedenborg wrote about, and without the funds necessary to financially support Latin translation, we wouldn't be in a position to even know what Swedenborg dedicated his life to putting down on paper in the first place. We need your help. Please consider making a donation to the Dr. Jonathan S. Rose Translation Fund at swedenborg.com/donate. But if you don't have the means at present, your support in the form of liking this podcast, writing a positive review, and sharing it with a friend is as real as cold, hard cash. We hope you'll continue to learn alongside us here on the Latin Playground.